Get away from me, he's dangerous. The voice of Mrs. Rebecca Stevens, sharp and venomous, sliced through the sterile quiet of the chemistry classroom at Whitmore Preparatory Academy, one of the most elite private schools in the nation. Her face was a mask of crimson fury, her hands trembling as she pointed an accusatory finger at Marcus Johnson. The 17-year-old black student stood frozen, his hands raised defensively, a storm of confusion and hurt clouding his features. The room shattered into chaos. Gasps echoed off the tiled floors. Chairs scraped back as students recoiled. And then, like a field of metallic flowers blooming in an instant, dozens of phones were raised, their lenses hungry to record what was about to become one of the most shocking incidents in the school's gilded history. In a corner of the room, unseen by the panicked teacher, Brad Wellington watched with a smirk of pure satisfaction. His plan was unfolding, every cruel detail falling perfectly into place. Mrs. Stevens was now fumbling with her phone, her voice climbing to a hysterical shriek. 911, I need the police, immediately. I have a violent black student threatening me and the others. He's completely out of control. Marcus's own voice, raw with emotion, broke through the noise. Mrs. Stevens, please, he pleaded, his words desperate yet steady. You know me. I have never been anything but respectful to you, to everyone here. Why are you doing this? But his calm, rational plea was like gasoline on a fire. Don't you dare talk back to me, she screamed, her words spilling into the phone. Officers, you have to hurry. He's getting more aggressive by the second. In the distance, a faint wail began to rise. Sirens, growing closer, louder, a soundtrack to a life about to be ruined. Marcus scanned the faces of his classmates. Some were recording, their expressions blank and detached. Others stared in stunned silence, a few wrestling with the knowledge that this was profoundly wrong, yet paralyzed by fear. Finally, his gaze settled forward, his eyes a mixture of searing pain and a flicker of unyielding determination. If you are ready to hear this incredible story of injustice, revenge, and ultimate triumph, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is only the beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. If you stand against racism and injustice, type yes in the comments below and tell us where you're watching from. But to understand how we arrived at that explosive moment, how a brilliant honor student became the target of a racist teacher and his jealous peers, and how 5 minutes would change all their lives forever, we must go back to where it all began. 2 months earlier, Marcus Johnson walked through the pristine, marble-floored halls of Whitmore Preparatory Academy for the very first time. This wasn't just a school, it was a kingdom of the American elite. It was where the children of senators and tech billionaires learned the art of power, where a single year's tuition surpassed the annual salary of most American families. Marcus had transferred from Chicago after his mother received a major promotion, a move that brought them to this bastion of wealth and privilege. But what the other students and even the teachers didn't know was exactly who his mother was. Marcus kept that information to himself, preferring to be judged on his own merit, and his merit spoke with a deafening roar. From his first day, Marcus was a phenomenon. While other students, groomed for this environment since birth, struggled with advanced placement courses, Marcus navigated them with an effortless grace. His test scores weren't just impressive, they were flawless, perfect. Within weeks, the hushed halls of Whitmore were buzzing, and Ivy League recruiters were calling the school, asking about the brilliant new student who was rewriting the academic standards. But Marcus's arrival didn't just create ripples of excitement. It created a seismic problem for those who had grown comfortable at the top of the food chain. At the center of that problem was Brad Wellington III, 18 years old with perfectly styled blonde hair and a blazer that cost more than a used car. Brad was Whitmore royalty. His family hadn't just attended the school, they had built it. Wellington Hall, the new science wing, was named for his grandfather. His great-grandfather was a founder. For 4 generations, the Wellingtons were the gold standard, and Brad had been groomed since birth for greatness, with Harvard considered not an ambition, but a birthright. He was the presumed valedictorian, the golden boy, trailed by a crew of equally privileged acolytes. There was Connor Hayes, the football captain with the build of a linebacker and an ego to match. Dylan Pierce, the smooth-talking student body president already practicing for a life in politics. And Jason Thornfield, the tech mogul's son who believed his father's money made him invincible. These were boys who had never been challenged, never been told no, and never truly had to work for anything. And then there was Ashley Morrison, Brad's girlfriend, the perfect, blonde accessory to his perfect life. Or so it seemed on the surface. Presiding over this privileged ecosystem was Principal Charles Whitmore, a man whose very name was etched into the school's foundation, a staunch guardian of its traditions. But the most dangerous player in this drama was Mrs. Rebecca Stevens. 45 years old, with 20 years of teaching advanced chemistry at Whitmore, she projected an image of polished professional excellence. She spoke often of maintaining standards and preserving the school's reputation. Beneath that carefully constructed facade, however, lurked a bitter, deep-seated prejudice she had concealed for decades. Mrs. Stevens believed that some students simply didn't belong at Whitmore, that they were usurping opportunities they hadn't earned, and that the school's sacred traditions were being eroded by outsiders. The moment Marcus Johnson walked into her classroom, something inside her bristled. Here was a confident, articulate young black man who carried himself not with gratitude or deference, but with the quiet assurance of someone who knew he belonged. And then, he began to excel. He didn't just do well, he dominated. While other students fumbled with basic equations, Marcus was solving complex problems that left even Mrs. Stevens secretly astonished. He grasped concepts in minutes that took others weeks to comprehend. His lab reports were flawless, his test scores perfect. And it wasn't just in her class, it was in advanced math, physics, literature. Every subject he touched turned to gold. Veteran teachers whispered they had never seen a mind like his. While Marcus was quietly revolutionizing the academic landscape, Brad Wellington was watching his world crumble. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the smartest person in the room. There was someone better than him, and that someone was everything Brad had been taught to look down upon. The breaking point arrived with the announcement of the annual National Science Competition. This was the pinnacle of high school academia. The winner didn't just get a trophy, they received automatic admission to Harvard University and a $100,000 scholarship. For Brad, this competition was everything. It was his destiny. His father had won it 30 years ago. It was meant to be Brad's guaranteed ticket, the crowning achievement of the Wellington legacy. Everyone had assumed he would represent Whitmore. But then Marcus Johnson arrived, and Brad's guaranteed victory was suddenly in jeopardy. The school's representative would be chosen based on comprehensive testing. As Marcus continued to rack up accolades, as teachers marveled at his talent, Brad watched his throne being usurped. Something dark began to fester in the gilded halls of Whitmore. Brad Wellington was not going to let some outsider from Chicago take what was promised to him. And unfortunately for Marcus, Brad had allies who felt the exact same way. The campaign to break Marcus Johnson was systematic and cruel, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. It started with small aggressions. Brad's crew would accidentally bump into Marcus in the crowded hallways, sending his books scattering across the floor. "Oops, sorry," Connor Hayes would smirk. "Guess you should watch where you're going. In our school." Then came the whispers. "Must be nice to be a diversity admission," Dylan Pierce would mutter just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Week 1, his chemistry textbook vanished just before a major test. Lab partners suddenly became unavailable. Week 2, he arrived at his locker to find a racial slur spray-painted across the door. At lunch, Connor would make a daily ritual of accidentally knocking his tray, sending food flying. By week 3, the attacks targeted his academics. Anonymous tips were sent to teachers, suggesting Marcus's work was too sophisticated, that he must be cheating. By week 4, it turned physical. Brad's crew would corner him in empty hallways, using their size to intimidate him. "Think you're so smart?" Connor would growl, towering over him. Week 5, the battle went digital. Fake social media profiles appeared, posting Marcus's photo with fabricated stories claiming he was a drug dealer, that he was unstable and dangerous. Through it all, Marcus did something that infuriated his tormentors more than any outburst could have. He didn't break. His grades remained perfect, his composure unshakable, and he documented everything, every slur, every shove, every threat, with meticulous detail, collecting photos, screenshots, and notes. The harassment reached a fever pitch one afternoon in the school parking lot. Brad's crew surrounded him, an audience of students gathering to watch. Connor shoved Marcus hard. Time to learn some respect. But Marcus, instead of flinching, met his gaze and spoke, his voice calm but carrying with lethal precision. "Connor, you're the football captain, yet you're ranked 47th academically. Dylan, it took you 3 tries to pass basic calculus. Jason, Your father bought your way into every program you've ever been in, and you still need a team of tutors." He turned his attention to the crowd. "You're not angry because I don't belong here," he said, his voice resonating with undeniable truth. "You're angry because I do, and that shatters everything you've been told about your own superiority." He let the words hang in the air. "The truth is you're scared. Scared that privilege isn't enough anymore." It was an intellectual knockout, but it would be a temporary victory. Desperate, privileged people are the most dangerous of all. And through all of this, one adult who should have protected him did the opposite. When Marcus reported the vandalism on his locker, Mrs. Stevens had dismissed him with cold condescension. "Mr. Johnson, perhaps you're being a bit too sensitive for Whitmore's competitive environment. Sometimes students from different backgrounds find it difficult to adjust." Marcus had left her office that day, knowing he was utterly alone. He didn't realize his tormentors were about to escalate their campaign to a level he could never have imagined. The final push came from Brad's own home. Seated at a vast mahogany dining table in their mansion overlooking the city, Brad's father, a man whose name graced Forbes lists, slid a newspaper clipping across the polished surface. The headline read, "Local teen hailed as rising star." Beneath it was a confident, smiling photo of Marcus Johnson. "4 generations of Wellingtons, Bradley," his father said, his voice like ice. "4 generations have walked through Harvard's gates. Failure is not an option in this family. I don't care what you have to do, but you will not be the one to break our legacy. Do I make myself clear?" The words haunted Brad. 3 days later, walking past Mrs. Stevens's classroom, he overheard her complaining to another teacher. "These urban students," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "They come here with these attitudes, thinking they know better than us. Who even knows if their grades from their old schools were legitimate?" Brad stopped. He had found his weapon. After school, he approached her. "Mrs. Stevens," he began, feigning concern, "I've been watching Marcus Johnson, and something just doesn't add up." He spun a web of lies about Marcus's expensive clothes, suggesting a connection to the drug trade in Chicago. Mrs. Stevens's eyes lit up with a malicious gleam. She had been searching for a reason, and Brad had just handed it to her. From that moment, an unholy alliance was formed. Their plan hit a snag, however, when the mock competition results were announced in the school auditorium. "In first place," Principal Whitmore declared, "with a perfect score of 100, is Marcus Johnson. In second place, with a score of 87, is Bradley Wellington." The room erupted in applause for Marcus, and for Brad, it felt like a public execution. The humiliation deepened when a Harvard recruiter made a special visit to Whitmore, not for the Wellington legacy, but specifically to meet Marcus Johnson. Brad watched from the hallway as the recruiter shook Marcus's hand, his face beaming. The recruiter never even glanced in Brad's direction. As Marcus left the meeting, Brad's own girlfriend, Ashley, approached him. "Congratulations, Marcus," she said, her smile genuine. "You really deserve it." Watching his rival receive praise from his girlfriend, Brad felt something inside him snap. Later, his friends twisted the knife. "Dude, that Harvard guy didn't even know who you were," Connor laughed. "You're gonna be the one to break the streak." That night, his father's words echoing in his mind. Failure is not an option. Brad knew what he had to do. The next morning, he arrived at school before dawn. Using his student council key, he made his way to the chemistry lab. The advanced equipment storage was locked, but he knew where Mrs. Stevens kept the spare key. He let himself in, his heart pounding with a dark and desperate resolve. His hands trembled as he carefully lifted the components from their case. $5,000 worth of advanced spectroscopy equipment, delicate, complex pieces crucial for high-level chemical analysis. The kind of hardware only someone with deep scientific knowledge would know how to use or how to sell on the black market. The plan's brilliance lay in its brutal simplicity. First, plant the equipment in Marcus's locker. Second, manufacture the evidence to make it look like Marcus was about to sell it. Who would ever believe that the perfect student, the school's academic star, was a common thief? Using a burner app, Brad meticulously crafted a series of fake text message threads. He mimicked the slang, the rhythm of speech he imagined someone from Marcus's Chicago background might use, creating a digital ghost that would frame the real person. The fabricated conversation was rich with detail: meetup times, pickup locations, even feigned anxiety about needing the money for college expenses, a touch he thought would make the whole lie feel painfully real. His hands were steady now. During the lunch period, he carefully placed the equipment in Marcus's locker, positioning it so it couldn't be missed. He then took screenshots of the fabricated texts, saved them to a flash drive, and prepared to deliver the final blow. That afternoon, Brad knocked on Mrs. Stevens' classroom door, flash drive in hand, ready with a story designed to shatter Marcus Johnson's future. "Mrs. Stevens," he said, his voice laced with counterfeit concern, "I think you need to see this. I was right about Marcus Johnson all along. If you're wondering just how far someone will go when their privilege feels threatened, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to take a turn that will shock you to your core." The morning that would change everything began like any other at Whitmore Preparatory Academy. Students filed into advanced chemistry, settling into their seats for what they assumed would be another routine lecture. Marcus Johnson took his usual spot in the front row, notebook at the ready, completely unaware that his entire world was about to be systematically dismantled. That morning, Mrs. Rebecca Stevens walked into her classroom ready to perform. Her face was flushed with manufactured outrage, her hands trembling with calculated emotion as she slammed a stack of books onto her desk. The sharp crack silenced the room. "Class," she announced, her voice ringing with theatrical gravity, "I have discovered something appalling. Someone in this school has stolen laboratory equipment valued at over $5,000. Whispers erupted. This was Whitmore Prep, a place where families donated buildings and students drove cars that cost more than houses. Who would need to steal from the school? Mrs. Stevens continued her performance, pacing dramatically. "This is more than theft," she declared. "This is a betrayal of the very values Whitmore Preparatory Academy was built on, a violation of our trust, our traditions." She paused, letting her eyes scan the room before they locked onto Marcus. "Given the gravity of this crime," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "I am demanding an immediate search of all student lockers. We will start with those who might have outside connections, those who might know how to move stolen scientific equipment." The implication was a targeted missile, and everyone knew its destination. She was aiming squarely at Marcus. Within minutes, Principal Whitmore arrived with school security in tow. The search began just as Mrs. Stevens had orchestrated, with Marcus's locker. As the security guard's key turned in the lock, a cold dread washed over Marcus. This felt too staged, too convenient. The locker door swung open, revealing the advanced spectroscopy equipment, carefully arranged to be seen instantly. But behind it was the final touch, printed screenshots of text messages, conversations that appeared to show Marcus arranging to sell the equipment to contacts in Chicago. The security guard recoiled. Principal Whitmore's face went white. A frantic buzz of whispers spread through the students gathered in the hall. Nearby, Brad Wellington and his friends put on a masterclass in deception. "Oh my God," Brad gasped, a hand flying to his mouth in feigned shock. "Marcus, how could you?" Connor Hayes shook his head, his face a mask of disappointment. "We trusted you, man. We welcomed you here, and this is how you repay us?" Dylan Pierce crossed his arms, his voice dripping with betrayal. "I can't believe I actually defended you when people said you didn't belong." But Ashley Morrison, Brad's girlfriend, watched the scene with a knot tightening in her stomach. She knew him and his friends too well. The timing was too perfect. As she studied Brad's face, she saw it, a flicker of cold satisfaction hiding beneath the mask of disbelief. Marcus stood frozen, staring at equipment he'd never touched and reading messages he'd never sent. "This isn't mine," he said, his voice quiet but firm amidst the chaos. "I have never seen any of this before. I didn't send those messages." Mrs. Stevens stepped forward, her voice rising with indignation. "Mr. Johnson, the evidence is right there. Are you going to stand there and lie to our faces?" But panic was not in Marcus Johnson's nature. His mind, honed by years of academic discipline, began to dissect the situation with cold logic. "Mrs. Stevens," he said calmly, "think about this rationally. Why would I steal from a class where I have the highest grade? Why would I risk my admission to Harvard, my entire future, for $5,000? His unshakable logic only seemed to enrage her. "Don't you dare lecture me about logic when you've been caught red-handed," Marcus pressed on, his voice even. "I'm asking for a proper investigation. Check the security cameras. See who accessed my locker. Analyze the metadata on these texts. The truth will show I'm innocent. But Mrs. Stevens was too far down the path she had chosen. Marcus's rational defense was making her look like a fool. "How dare you make demands?" she shrieked. "You are a thief and a liar." That was Brad Wellington's cue. He stepped forward, his expression a perfect blend of concern and reluctance. "Mrs. Stevens," he said, his voice just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't want to make things worse, but Marcus has been acting strange lately. He got really aggressive with me yesterday and, well, look at how he's raising his voice at you right now." "I'm not raising my voice," Marcus stated calmly. But the accusation was all Mrs. Stevens needed. "Yes, you are!" she shrieked, her control shattering. "You're getting aggressive! You're threatening me!" Marcus looked around at his classmates. Confusion and hurt itched on his face. "I'm not threatening anyone. I am innocent." Brad wasn't done. "Mrs. Stevens, maybe we should call security. He's becoming more agitated. I'm worried for everyone's safety." In that moment, Mrs. Stevens completely unraveled. All her resentment, her fury at being challenged by a student she saw as an outsider exploded in a burst of pure hysteria. "Get away from me, he's dangerous," she screamed, stumbling backward as if Marcus had physically attacked her. The hallway descended into chaos. Students gasped, phones emerging to record the meltdown. Marcus held his hands up defensively, stepping back. "Mrs. Stevens, please, you know me. Why are you doing this?" She was already dialing 911, her voice pitching into a hysterical sob. "911, I need police at Whitmore Academy immediately. I have a violent black student threatening me and the other students. He's completely out of control." The dispatcher's questions were met with escalating lies. "He's been aggressive for weeks. A history of threats. I think he might be on drugs. His behavior is so erratic. Please, hurry. He's getting more violent by the second." Marcus felt his world collapsing. This woman, his teacher, was painting him as a monster to the police. "Mrs. Stevens, please," he pleaded, his voice finally breaking. "Don't you talk back to me," she screamed into the phone. "Officers, he's getting more aggressive. Hurry!" In the distance, the first sirens began to wail. Within minutes, Officers Collins and Hayes stormed into Whitmore Preparatory Academy, braced for a violent confrontation. What they found was not chaos, but a composed, articulate young black man in a pristine school uniform, standing calmly with his hands visible. The scene didn't match the frantic 911 call in the slightest. But Officers Collins and Hayes didn't see the disconnect. They saw a black face in a wealthy white institution, and their prejudice filled in the rest. They saw Mrs. Stevens's hysteria and took it as truth. They saw Marcus's composure and read it as defiance. "You the kid causing all the trouble?" Officer Collins barked. "No, sir," Marcus replied respectfully. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm being framed." Officer Hayes let out a mocking laugh. "Sure you are, kid. That's what they all say." What none of them knew, not Mrs. Stevens, not Brad, not the two officers, was that Marcus Johnson had just made a phone call. A simple call to his mother, who would be arriving at Whitmore Preparatory Academy very, very soon. And when she did, they would all learn exactly who they had just provoked. If you were in Marcus's shoes, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The officers' aggression was immediate. They had come expecting a criminal, and no amount of reason from Marcus was going to change their minds. "Hands behind your back. Now," Officer Collins commanded, refusing to even listen. Marcus remained calm. "Officers, this equipment was planted in my locker. I can prove my innocence if you'll just look at the facts." Officer Hayes sneered. "Look at the facts? Kid, we've heard it all before. You think using big words makes you innocent?" "I have a perfect academic record," Marcus tried again. "I'm being recruited by Harvard. Why would I risk everything for this?" "Harvard?" Officer Collins snorted. "Right. And I'm the King of England. You probably broke in to steal this stuff." They dismissed every word, mocking his intelligence, treating him like a hardened criminal. "Please," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "I need to call my mother. I have the right to a phone call." Both officers laughed cruelly. "Mommy can't help you now, boy," Hayes jeered. "Welcome to the real world." Principal Whitmore, who had been watching with a growing sense of dread, finally intervened. "Officers," he said tentatively, Perhaps we should allow him the call. It is standard procedure. Collins glared but conceded. Fine. One call. Make it quick. Marcus took the phone, his hands shaking not with fear, but with the sheer weight of the injustice. He dialed a number he knew by heart. When she answered, his voice was level. Mom, I'm at school. They're arresting me for something I didn't do. He paused. They're calling me dangerous. He hung up. No pleading, no frantic explanation. Just the facts. He knew that was all she would need. The officer scoffed at the brief call. That's it? Guess Mommy isn't in a rush to save her little boy. But Marcus knew who was coming. 7 minutes later, a convoy of black SUVs with government plates swept into the school's circular driveway. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a woman in her late 40s emerged. She wore a tailored power suit-like armor and moved with the unshakable confidence of someone who commanded entire rooms with a single glance. Behind her, federal agents fanned out, their badges gleaming, their faces grimly professional. She strode through the academy doors, her presence sucking the air out of the hallway. Victoria Johnson, the Attorney General of the United States, had arrived. Her eyes, sharp and furious, found her son. The moment Officers Collins and Hayes saw her, flanked by federal agents, the color drained from their faces. They didn't know who she was, but they knew they had made a catastrophic error. I'm Attorney General Victoria Johnson, she announced, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire Justice Department. And I believe you gentlemen have my son in custody. The silence was absolute. Mrs. Stevens' face turned ghostly white. Principal Whitmore looked as if he might collapse. Brad Wellington, whose plan had been unfolding so perfectly, was now frozen in terror. Ma'am, Officer Collins stammered, we were just responding to a 911 call. A 911 call about a violent student? Victoria's voice was dangerously calm. You mean my son, Marcus? An honor roll student, headed to Harvard, who has never had so much as a detention? She gestured to her team. Agents, I want all security footage from this school for the past 24 hours. I want a full forensic analysis of those text messages, and I want a complete investigation into this incident. Now. The federal team moved with ruthless efficiency. 10 minutes later, an agent called out from the security office. Attorney General Johnson, you need to see this. On the monitors, the evidence was undeniable. Clear footage of Brad Wellington entering the chemistry lab before school, taking the spectroscopy equipment, more footage of him planting it in Marcus's locker. And there was more. The agents uncovered months of recordings showing the systematic harassment campaign the administration had ignored, the bullying, the intimidation, all documented in high definition. The texts were traced in minutes, originating from a burner app on a phone registered to Brad Wellington. Victoria Johnson absorbed the evidence, her expression hardening into cold fury. She turned, her gaze sweeping over Mrs. Stevens, the cowering students, and the 2 local cops. Let me be perfectly clear about what has happened here, she began, her voice cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. My son, Marcus Johnson, has been the target of a months-long campaign of racial harassment, systematic bullying, and today, a criminal conspiracy to frame him for a felony. She held up a hand, silencing Mrs. Stevens before she could speak. Mrs. Stevens, you have filed a fraudulent police report and made false statements to emergency services, which are federal offenses. Officers Collins and Hayes, you have blatantly violated my son's civil rights under color of law. Your actions are a disgrace to the badge. She nodded to her agents. Officers Collins and Hayes, you are under arrest for violation of federal civil rights law. You have the right to remain silent. As federal agents cuffed the 2 stunned policemen, Victoria turned her attention to the others. Mrs. Stevens, consider your employment here terminated. You will face federal charges for your role in this. The Department of Justice will be prosecuting you personally. Mrs. Stevens collapsed into a nearby chair, a broken sob escaping her lips as her life imploded. Brad Wellington, Victoria's voice was like ice. You are under arrest for grand larceny, conspiracy, and filing a false police report. Your friends will be facing a full federal investigation for their coordinated harassment campaign. Brad's face went ashen as handcuffs closed around his wrists. His perfect plan hadn't just failed, it had brought the full weight of the federal government down upon him. And Principal Whitmore, she concluded, you are on administrative leave pending an investigation into your institution's gross negligence. This school is now under federal oversight. Under the pressure, Brad's crew shattered. Connor Hayes was the first to confess. "We were just trying to get him to leave," he sobbed. "Brad said he didn't belong here, that he was taking our spot." Dylan Pierce admitted to the months of planned bullying, a deliberate campaign to make Marcus's life so miserable he would go back to Chicago. Jason Thornfield's powerful family, terrified of the scandal, immediately disowned him. While Jason's father released a public statement disowning his son's actions, it was Brad Wellington's complete and utter breakdown that provided the most damning testimony. Facing a slate of federal charges that promised years in prison with his family's sterling reputation shattered, Brad confessed everything. Through a torrent of tears and ragged, hyperventilating breaths, he admitted to the all-consuming jealousy he felt as Marcus outperformed him. He confessed to orchestrating the systematic bullying, to stealing the chemistry equipment, to fabricating the text messages, and to manipulating Mrs. Stevens into making the false accusations. "I couldn't let him beat me," Brad sobbed, his voice cracking during the official confession. "4 generations of my family went to Harvard. I was supposed to be the best, the smartest, but he came from nowhere and made me look like nothing. I had to get rid of him." The final humiliation was delivered by his own father. At a hastily called press conference, William Wellington Jr. publicly cast his son out. "The Wellington family has always stood for excellence and integrity," he stated, his voice a cold, emotionless blade. "Bradley's actions do not represent our values. We are cutting all ties with him to preserve our family's reputation." Within 24 hours, the narrative had been violently inverted. Marcus Johnson, the boy led away in handcuffs, was now vindicated, the victim of the most sophisticated conspiracy and harassment case in private school history. The truth had burst into the light, justice had begun its inexorable march, and every person who had wronged him was now facing the consequences. But the story was far from over. Marcus Johnson and his mother, Attorney General Victoria Johnson, were about to leverage this scandal to change not just Whitmore Preparatory Academy, but the very fabric of elite education in America. 3 months later, the world was an unrecognizable place for everyone involved. The consequences had woven a powerful saga of justice, transformation, and the ultimate triumph of truth over prejudice. Marcus Johnson was precisely where he belonged, thriving on a full scholarship at Harvard University. The same young man who had been falsely accused and shackled was now excelling at one of the world's most prestigious institutions. His dorm room was a testament to his vindication, filled with acceptance letters from other Ivy League schools that had scrambled to recruit him after his story went national. His professors were astounded by his analytical mind and mature perspective, but it was his quiet determination to help others that impressed them most. He had already started a support group for minority students navigating discrimination and was working directly with Harvard's administration to pioneer new anti-bias policies. "What happened at Whitmore was terrible," Marcus told a Harvard reporter, his gaze steady. "But it proved that even in the most privileged environments, truth and justice can prevail if you have the courage to stand up for what's right." Meanwhile, Rebecca Stevens was living a starkly different reality. The woman who once commanded respect as a chemistry teacher was now working the night shift at a desolate gas station. Her trial had been a media sensation, the evidence against her overwhelming. Security footage, the recorded 911 call, and damning testimony from students. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Her teaching license was permanently revoked, and a massive civil lawsuit guaranteed her financial ruin. Most devastating of all, her own children, ashamed of what their mother had become, had ceased all contact. Standing behind bulletproof glass at 2 in the morning, selling cigarettes and lottery tickets, Mrs. Stevens had endless hollow hours to contemplate how a 20-year career was incinerated in a single moment of racist hatred. But the most dramatic fall from grace belonged to Brad Wellington III. The golden boy destined for Harvard, who had stalked Whitmore's halls like a prince, was now a ward of the state in juvenile detention, his future a wasteland of his own making. The federal charges were severe: theft, conspiracy, filing false police reports, and civil rights violations. During his sentencing, Brad had collapsed into a weeping, incoherent mess. "I destroyed everything," he cried out to the judge. "I destroyed Marcus's reputation, my own future, my family's name. And for what? Because I was jealous?" The judge offered no mercy. 18 months in juvenile detention, 3 years of probation, and 1,000 hours of community service. Every college prospect had vanished. Harvard had rescinded all interest. Even state schools rejected his applications. True to his word, his father had disowned him, and the Wellington family, in a desperate bid to salvage their name, had donated millions to civil rights organizations. His former friends faced their own reckonings. Connor was kicked off the football team and expelled. Dylan was stripped of his student presidency. Jason's family disowned him and moved him to another state. The disgraced officers, Collins and Hayes, were already serving federal prison sentences, their law enforcement careers a distant, shameful memory. The most profound transformation, however, occurred at Whitmore Preparatory Academy itself. A federal investigation had unearthed decades of discriminatory practices, leading the Department of Justice to file a sweeping civil rights lawsuit that forced a complete institutional overhaul. Under federal oversight, Whitmore was mandated to achieve 40% minority enrollment within 2 years. The once overwhelmingly white and wealthy bastion of privilege was now becoming genuinely diverse. Mandatory bias training was implemented for all staff, and in a moment of poetic justice, the Wellington Science Wing was formally renamed the Marcus Johnson Center for Academic Excellence. The change was powerfully crystallized when Marcus returned as a guest speaker. The auditorium was packed with a new generation of students, many of whom were minorities who never would have had a chance under the old regime. "I won't lie to you," Marcus began, his voice resonating through the hall. "What happened to me here was traumatic and wrong. But I learned that truth is stronger than lies, that justice is more powerful than prejudice, and that one person's courage can change an entire institution." He looked out at the diverse faces before him. "Some of you are here because of what happened to me. Don't waste that opportunity. Use it to become the leaders and changemakers this world so desperately needs." The standing ovation was thunderous and sustained. Afterwards, Marcus met with students, including a young Latina girl who told him, "Your story gave me the strength to report the bullying I'm experiencing," and a young black student who said, "You showed me that being smart isn't something to hide. I'm going to chase my dreams no matter what." These were the moments that affirmed the worth of his ordeal. The legal battles concluded with a multi-billion-dollar settlement that funded scholarships for minority students across the nation. Marcus became a sought-after speaker, testifying before Congress on the need for stronger civil rights enforcement in education. Through it all, he remained grounded, focusing on his government studies with a quiet intensity. "Marcus has always been special," his mother, Victoria, told the Washington Post. "But what impressed me most wasn't his intelligence, but his character. Even when he was being vilified, he never lost his dignity or his commitment to what was right." Walking across Harvard Yard, Marcus often reflected on how easily he could have given up, transferred back to Chicago, and let the darkness win. But he had chosen to fight. His story had transcended personal victory. It had become a symbol of the enduring struggle for equality in America. 3 years later, during his Harvard graduation speech, Marcus looked out at the hopeful crowd. "They thought they could break me with bullying, lies, and false accusations," he said, his voice clear and strong. "They learned that truth and justice always win in the end. But more importantly, they learned that when you try to destroy someone's future because of prejudice and hate, you ultimately destroy your own." Marcus Johnson's story was just the beginning of a life dedicated to justice. A powerful reminder that in a world still grappling with darkness, the courage and moral clarity of a single individual could, and still can, change everything.